So for our ish printing project, you're going to need markers. In your kit, you'll have a styrofoam plate. This is your printing plate. You'll have a sponge, and you'll be given two pieces of paper, plain piece of paper that has 4 squares. This is your brainstorming page. And then you'll be given a piece of paper that has a 6x6 square on it that you'll use for printing. You'll need to get a small container with just a little bit of water. You don't need a whole lot of water for this project. And then you'll need a pencil as well. So for this video, it's broken up into 3 parts. So for part 1, this is our brainstorming part. So for brainstorming, we only need our brainstorming page and our pencil. The rest of the supplies you can put aside, or just grab your brainstorm page and a pencil. This is where we just kind of get ideas of what we want to do on our final plate, because we don't want to go to our final plate just yet until we really get a general idea. So you have 4 designs. You're going to start with one of your squares, and we're simply just going to use basic lines and shape. We're going to try to keep our design simple, because if it's too complicated, it's going to be really hard to print into the styrofoam. So I'm just going to start out and make designs using lines into one of my squares. These can be completely random. You can choose to make a pattern of designs using your basic lines, using shapes. But you want to kind of just keep it simple. You don't want to have a lot of small areas. You don't want to have too much large areas either. You kind of want to balance out your design. So you're going to keep going and do different designs. Maybe this one I start with more curved lines. I add in some different types of lines. I add in some shapes to this one. Keep going, kind of like a teardrop shape all the way around. Keep going until I fill my space up. You're going to continue this until you have 4 kind of ideas. You may not end up using these ideas, but it's at least part of the artistic process. So I'm going to continue with another design. Just again, remember keeping it simple, using basic lines and shapes. You're going to fill your space up, balance it out. And I'm kind of using that idea of those concentric circles that we learned in our last project. And then again, my last design. Remember lines, maybe use some basic shapes. And make sure you're using that space up. And keeping it simple. So that is part 1. So now you're going to pause the video and create this on your own. Alright, so welcome back. This is part 2, where we're going to be creating our plate. So in part 1, you brainstorm some ideas for different ideas for plates. Now you're going to then pick one of those designs, and you're going to draw it onto your plate. And for this, you're going to need your styrofoam plate and a pencil. And when you're drawing onto your plate, you're going to want to remember that you don't want to press too hard that you end up poking through the styrofoam, but you want to press down hard enough that you are leaving an impression into the styrofoam. If it's too light, it's not going to print. And so what you're going to do is pick your design that you want to print and then draw it onto your plate. You can always go back and put more pressure, but for the first part, if you want to just draw it out, draw your design onto your plate. Probably can't see this very well. I'm drawing out my design. I mean, again, I'm just keeping it simple. Alright, now that I've laid out my design, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to make my lines deeper. So right now I've just basically scratched the surface. What I want to end up doing is scoring the surface, but not cutting the surface. Cutting would mean I go all the way through. I just want to make an indent into the styrofoam. So I'm going to take my pencil and I'm kind of push down a little bit so that it pushes down, it indents into my plate. So what we're doing is we're creating an area that's going to remain white. We're creating a relief. So if you look at the side of the plate, you can kind of see briefly how it's indented in. You want to make sure that you, again, you're pressing down, but you're not cutting through the styrofoam. You make your lines thin, you can make your lines thick. Again, you're just scoring the surface of your plate. Forgot a line up here. Let's go back and get that. You're going to continue this until you have scored all your lines. And again, it's alright if your idea changed from your initial brainstorm. That's just part of your process. Maybe when you look at your plate, you decide that you want to add more to it. So I think I want to add in some lines in here just to kind of break up. So I'm going to score in some lines using my pencil. Remember, I'm not pushing down too hard, so I don't want to cut through my plate. I want to create a relief. So maybe I want to repeat that same process in these lines up here. So again, I'm scoring my surface of my plate, not cutting through, just scoring to create a relief. Alright, so once you have your plate, this is your printing plate, you're going to be able to use this over and over. So you no longer need your brainstorm page. You're going to then be moving on to where you need to get your printing page, which has that square on it. You'll no longer need your pencil other than to write your name on the back of your paper. And you are going to, at this time, you're going to pause and create your styrofoam plate. Remember that you're going to draw your design with a pencil onto the plate. It works better with a regular pencil, not a mechanical pencil. You're going to score your lines into your plate, and then you're going to make sure that you don't put too much pressure that you cut through, but you put enough pressure that you can kind of create a ridge in your styrofoam plate. So pause the video and create your printing plate, and when we come back, we'll move on to part 3, which is the printing process. Alright, welcome back for part 3, which is the printing of your plate that you made. So for this part of the project, you're going to need, as I said, your 6x6 square of paper with your name on the back. You're going to need your markers. Washable markers work best, but if you don't, I'm pretty sure that regular markers will work. You're going to need your container of water, and you're going to need a sponge. So for the first part, you're going to take your plate and you're going to color your surface with markers. One thing you're going to remember is where you've etched is not going to hold color. So don't try to get in there and add color because it's not going to show up when you print. Anywhere that you have lines is actually going to remain white once you see the first printing. And one thing I want to remember, actually before we even start, is I want to flip my plate over. I'm going to determine where I want my center of my print to be because we're going to create a radial design with this. So I think I want my center to be right here. So I'm going to flip my plate over and I'm just going to make a little mark on the back of the plate. And then I might want to end up using a marker or a Sharpie to kind of indicate it. Just so I know that that line lines up with the center of my printing. So I'm going to flip it back over and I'm going to start adding colors to my plate. So I'm going to do this by simply taking my markers and coloring my surface. You want to use the edge of the marker, the conical part of the marker. You don't want to use the point because you don't want to risk putting dents into your plate. So you're going to go and color your plate however you want, whatever colors you want to use. That is up to you. But you're going to want to remember where you've placed your colors each time so that you get the same print as you do your radial design. So again, using the edge of the marker, not the tip, because you don't want to scratch into your plate, because that'll change your plate, and you want to create kind of an identical design each time as you can. Although the process that we're using is called a monoprint because you can only get one print at a time. So now I'm going to add, remember, edge of my marker. Take a moment to think about where you want to, what colors you want to use, where you want to place your color. Another hint is you want to try not to touch your surface of your plate once you add color, because if you do that, you're going to end up taking the color off with your finger, and then it won't have the ink you need to print with. Add my last color. Again, whatever colors you choose, you want to make sure that you're able to repeat those again over and over again. So that is how you color your plate. Now you're going to put that aside for a second and grab your printing paper. And on here you can kind of see my square. It's really light, but you're going to end up having a little bit darker square because it's going to be printed out. So you're going to take your sponge, and you're only going to be working in 1/4 section at a time of your paper. So you're going to take your sponge, and you need to get your paper wet, but not too wet. You want to just kind of be able to see the water on the surface. So you're going to take your sponge, kind of squeeze it out a little bit, and then you're going to wet your paper. You just want to be able to see the water on the surface. You don't want to have it too wet that you end up putting a hole through your paper. So put the sponge aside. You're going to take your printing plate and flip it over. And remember, I made that mark on the corner so I know where that needs to go to the center of my paper. So I'm going to line my plate up, the edge of my plate, with the edge of my paper. And I'm simply going to then put it down, and I'm going to press down and put down weight onto my styrofoam all the way around, along the corners, in the middle, so that I'm stamping on the colors that I just colored onto my plate onto my paper. And what I can do is I can slowly pull it up on one side to see if the colors are printing. You want to kind of check all the way around. Didn't really get to see that you're pushing down. If you have to, go back over with your thumb and push down. But do not move the plate, because if you move the plate, then it's going to interrupt your print. And when you put down your pressure onto your plate, you're simply going to lift it up, and you're left with the print of what you had colored on your plate. You're going to then, the next step is to go back, put your print aside. For the second one, you're going to color and print again. I'm going to do that process, but I'm going to pause the video and come back once I've colored and I'm ready to print. So I'm going to color my plate using my markers. I'm going to make sure that I color the same colors that I did before so that my print remains the same. So I'm going to pause my video and come back when I'm ready to print. So welcome back. I just finished coloring my plate for a second time. So I'm going to repeat the process. So this time I'm going to print it in a different spot. So I'm going to move over, and I'm going to need my sponge, and I'm going to wet my sponge. Remember, you don't want too much water, you don't want to rip a hole in your paper, and you just want to coat the paper surface so that you can kind of just see barely a light coating of water onto your paper. You're going to take your printing plate and flip it over. This time though, the line that I wanted for my center is going to be pointing in the opposite direction. So basically what I'm doing is I just kind of flipped my plate. So line it up again with those edge of your printing square and press down. You want to press down all the way around. You're getting all surface of your plate. You can check to see if it's printing alright, if you need to put down more pressure in any places. Pressure is key to this. You want to make sure that you're really pressing down so it stamps that ink onto your paper. When you're done, lift it up, and this is your design. And you're going to repeat that process 2 more times. So again, you're going to color your plate with your markers in the same color that you did before. You're going to take your sponge and get it wet, squeeze out most of the water. You're going to wet your paper so that the water is just barely coating the surface. You don't want to be pooled of water. And then you're going to line your plate up with your center line's going to go in that center of your square. Press down and print, put down pressure, transfer until you have all 4 sides. When I come back, I'll be printing the last one of this so you can see the finished product. I am back for my final printing. So I've colored my block with my markers. Remember to use the edge of your marker, not the tip, so you don't scratch your plate. Colored it the same way I did each other time so that I don't get a different print. Now, for my final print, I'm going to take my sponge, squeeze out the excess water, and I'm just going to coat the surface of my paper so that it is wet, but not soaking wet. I'm going to take my plate and I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to make it so again that my center, that my mark that I made, goes towards the center of my square. I'm going to line my plate up with the outside edge of my square and press down, putting down pressure, going over the entire surface of the plate. Making sure that I put down as much pressure as I can. When you're done, you lift it up a little bit, check where you might need to put down some more pressure. And then pull up your print, and you're left with your final design. We created what was called radial symmetry. It's everything radiated from that center point, and I rotated my block each time. And this was my final print. I'd set that aside to dry, and then we would trim it down and frame it. Have fun creating your own printing block and printing your ish print. Enjoy!